John is now going to give his talk on Braintree's Paths and Roadways, 1600 to the present. John is a retired environmental engineer. For the past 5 years, he's been a volunteer at the Braintree Historical Society. He currently manages a house plaque program. And in addition to that, he's a great guy and one of the best volunteers we could ever hope to have. John.
Thank you, Stephen. I thought I would start out with a little explanation of why I'm here tonight, sort of the genesis of tonight's talk. I've been looking at old houses in Braintree that need plaques. Fortunately, we have nearly 100. The research for that gets me back into the deeds and references to various roadways. And so I've looked into that over the years and got an understanding of where all the early roads were in Braintree. And there are scores of articles by people who were in the Historical Society and have been doing this for the last 90 years. And I've learned through reading which early roads were Native American paths. So Steve heard me talking about that one day, and he said, you know, that might make a good topic for our annual meeting. It's funny because I did not grow up in Braintree and probably don't know where 80% of the roads are in Braintree, but I do know where the ancient paths were, and I will show you those tonight. But I went on and looked at maps over the years of the pattern of development in Braintree. And roads were built for a need, either commercial or residential development. And it occurred to me that in Braintree history, the Braintree we know today, that there were three dates or three catalysts really for the way we have our roads in Braintree today. And the dates that I've chosen are 1845, 1901, and 1960. And you'll see why I chose those dates. So that's my thesis. I'm going to use maps that we have in our collection, as well as some wonderful photographs to make my point, and you'll have to be the judge whether or not you think those are correct. A few acknowledgements before I get started. My son, Timothy, helped me out with all of this. Thank you, Tim. Braintree High School graduate. I also want to thank the volunteers that I work with. There's not many of us currently, but we do some really good work. We're organizing now our photographs, some of the ones you'll see today. Ron Frazier, I'd like to thank for the photographs that you've made available to us recently. And I'd like to thank Bob Harris. Bob Harris is not here tonight, but he's our past president. And I came to the Braintree Historical Society about 5 years ago, intending to write an article about the Braintree Golf Course history that I had played on for many years, and I did that. It got published in the Ledger. I happened to remark one day to Bob of what a great collection of maps there were, and like any true president, he said, well, come on, you can help out by organizing, which I did. And then, of course, subsequently, he gave me the role of the manager of the House Plaque Program, which Adrian Whitehouse and I are currently the two-person team for that. So I am grateful because in retirement, it's been a great hobby for me. So without further ado, you're going to hear tonight about those colonial roads, and you're going to hear tonight about certain events in Braintree history. So let's start off, can you hear me? So let's start off with the people that lived in Braintree way back. These are the original Braintreeites, Native Americans who lived here starting about 10,000 years ago. They moved in after the glaciers melted, which Braintree, if you were here 4,000 years ago, rather 20,000 years ago, there was 4,000 feet of ice pressing down on Braintree, and of course nothing was growing or anything. The people that came in were originally hunters, gatherers, but then they gradually evolved to a farming people. They were peaceful people. They were the Massachusetts. They grew corn, beans, and squash. They utilized fresh and saltwater fish, and especially shellfish. And they lived here in Braintree. I'll show you a map later where we believe they lived on the river systems, and they frequently went down to the shore to get their resources. They were very a society that was at peace with other peoples, and unfortunately they weren't around for the most part by the time the English got here because of the Great Dying. It turns out that Braintree was the site of two of the most important trade routes for early Americans. And the reason for that is many reasons for that, but the Native Americans had resources that no one else had. They had stone from the Blue Hills, and 300 million years ago, this whole area was all volcanoes, and so a lot of material came up from the center, from the deep below the surface that represented rock that was very hard, and it kept its shape. And these were all, of course, tradable material. This is a 4,000 or 5,000 year old arrowhead. If it's chipped properly, it holds a real sharp edge, and if your whole society is based on being able to clothe you in winter with the deer skin or whatever, having the right tools are very important. The granite, the slate were very hard, and so those things were traded widely. So two of the principal trade routes were coming through Braintree. This is a 1790, early 1790s map. The original is at the Massachusetts Archives. It's a pretty simple map, but it is to scale, and I've marked it up in colors to help out. So just to orient you, this is the shape of Braintree, Weymouth to the east on the right, Randolph on the south and southwest, and Quincy on the north and northwest. This map was drawn right after Quincy decided they no longer wanted to be part of Braintree, and Randolph did the same thing within a year or two. Later on, East Randolph decided they didn't want to be part of Randolph, and they broke off as Holbrook. So this is what it looked like when John Adams was the Vice President of the United States. So a little bit about the river systems. This big black blob here is the Fore River. This is the Manaticate River running through East Braintree to the center of town till it gets to the Braintree Golf Course on the 16th hole, and then it splits. Two river systems come together at that point. One of them comes down from Canton and through Randolph. That's the Blue Hill River. Houghton's Pond discharges to that river, Ponkapog area. When it gets to Braintree, it's called the Farm River because there was a Moore's farm there on Granite Street, and that's what the Braintreeites thought of when they thought of that river, not the Blue Hill River. Depending on the map, it's both things. And then coming up from the south, from Avon and Randolph, was the Cachado River. And where those meet, it forms the Manaticate. Archaeologists have looked at this entire system, and in the 1950s, they've identified at least a dozen sites where Native Americans had encampments, either seasonal or long-term. This map also shows what was known as Little Pond to about the year 1900. Now it's known as Sunset Lake, and Great Pond, which, as most of you know, is the source of our water supply. So the two trails that were important for trade, one was called the Bay Path. It started in actually Hudson Valley, came clear across Massachusetts to the vicinity of Boston, split into a northern branch that went up to Maine, and then the southern branch comes through the South Shore on the way to Plymouth and the Cape Cod. And in Braintree, I'm going to start here in, say, Quincy Center. So this is the native path coming through This black dot is the Adams House. So you go up the hill on Franklin Street, if you know the area. Down the hill, you're passing by the Ross School on the left, the East Braintree Fire Station. Come along the Manatequit River, cross over the Manatequit River at a point that's fordable, upstream of the tidal influence, up over a little hill into the landing, and then another 30 miles to Plymouth. Today, we call this Commercial Street. It's on the exact same path it was there. The other major trail gets from Boston Harbor and goes south if you wanted to trade to Narragansett Bay or Long Island or whatever, and that was the North-South Trail. And it connects to the coastal path at two locations. One is here, just prior to present-day Braintree. It comes in back of Archbishop Williams High School, down through the center of town, passing out front here, and gets to this point here, which is South Braintree Square, then wraps around, goes west and then south, and then another 30 miles to get to the Taunton River, where one could get in a canoe and be trading further south. So this section of the ancient path is known as Washington Street, to the point where it gets to about the South Congregational Church, and this portion of the path is known as Pond Street. There was another connection to that path as well. That also started on the coastal road near the Ross School and went westerly, very near where the Manatequit River makes that hairpin turn on Elm Street and comes out to present-day Braintree Square. The colonists called that the Town Way. And if you look at early settlement of Braintree, Richard Thayer, a lot of families, this was the original part of town that was settled. Two other paths we know were Native American trails. One of them is this path here that goes from north to south. This would be great if you're farther south in Braintree and trying to get to the seashore. That path we know as Liberty Street. And the second one is this path here starts on this about here where the old Braintree High School is, where some of you went, and goes westerly up towards Great Pond, and we know that today as West Street. There's probably other paths that were formerly Native American paths. These are the ones that we absolutely know about. Sir, I'm going to take questions at the end if you don't mind. Thank you. Because I've been put on the clock for 45 minutes and I better deliver. These paths were very important. The Commercial Street was known as the Plymouth Road. It was became early colonial road. This marker still exists in Braintree. It's 12 miles from Boston on Commercial Street. This is an 1832 map of Braintree. It shows the roads that were there at that time, and I'll explain later how many roads there were, but there weren't that many. The other interesting thing is that these areas here around Granite Street, around the Braintree Golf Course, around where Route 3 is, and over here where Pond Meadow Park, there were vast areas of swamp in Braintree, many of which have been filled in. And that was important because when the English first came, they needed iron, and they needed to find swamps that had bog iron and places that had lots of timber. So we think that, so the ironworks were located right here where the Manatequit River comes close to Elm Street, and we believe that Middle Street here, which goes southerly and connects into Liberty, was one of the first streets in Braintree purposely built so that they could bring the bog iron in and bring the wood in to the ironworks. Ironworks didn't last very long, maybe 10 years. It really wasn't make it financially, but nevertheless, it was one of the first in Massachusetts. When the English came, they also looked for gold and silver. That didn't work out either. And they tried to plant tobacco, and they were very disappointed because they didn't have any cash crop. So let's look at the early period of the country after the Revolution. Because Braintree had so few roads, and because everyone in town knew everyone else, there's only 1,500 people in Braintree at the Revolution. Everyone knew where everyone else lived. There were very few outsiders in town, and there was really no reason to name the streets and roads. But by 1837, Benjamin French was given responsibility to come up with a list. This was the list he presented. It was passed at town meeting, and just like the old-fashioned town meetings at Braintree, the very next day, petitions started because people didn't like the names. Monadequat was changed to Adams, which I think is a great idea. After all, both Adams had been president by then. Pleasant Street, the nice sounding name, but the people on Middle Street wanted to be known as Middle Street, and they would change back to Middle. And then Commercial Street, they didn't like Plymouth Street, even though in colonial times it was called the Plymouth Road, but that went back to Commercial Street. So those three were changed. Okay, I'm to the point now where I know I've told you everything I know about those ancient paths. And now the interesting part to me, and the more I look at our maps, the more I see what were the factors in the development of Braintree. And the first date that I've selected is 1845. In November of that year, the Old Colony came to Braintree. This is an early map showing the route that was available in 46. Boston to Fall River was very important because one could put their goods or get on a steamer and go to New York or the southern ports. And for decades, that was one of the most heavily traveled railroads in the country. Braintree's railroads were early. 1845 was only about 10 or 15 years after the first railroads in the entire country. As you can see, Braintree is strategically located because it's the point where the Plymouth branch goes off, and that was important in terms of placing the stations. This is a map about 10 years later, just before the Civil War, and you can clearly see the Old Colony Railroad coming through the center of town, Boston's to the north, and then getting to this point and splitting Fall River branch and the Plymouth branch. Many of you know that the first railway in the country was in Quincy. Didn't look anything like this iron horse. The Quincy Railroad was a flat car that you put stone on wooden rails, pulled 3 miles by a horse to get to the Neponset River to offload the stone. There's two different types of railroads. So I'm going to show you where each of the three railroad stations was in Braintree, because those railroad stations attracted development around them. One was placed in South Braintree near the square. So in this street here is Pearl Street. The station is right here. Just to orient you again, you're coming down Washington Street, past Thayer Academy, past Town Hall, South Braintree Square. Then Washington Street goes out, as you know, to Sunset Lake. This is Pond Street. You can see this was a map done later in the 1880s, but by then there's mills along the river and mill ponds along the river. And I should say, these maps are extraordinary. They're called bird's eye view maps. They're done by artists who walk the street and sketch each home as it would look from a bird flying at 1,000 feet or whatever. They're truly remarkable. This is, of course, all done in the days before aerial photography. So this shows the development pattern. You'll probably all recognize this view. Configuration-wise, South Braintree Square hasn't changed much since the 1920s or 1930s. If you know your cars, you can probably tell me exactly when this was built. And here's the South Braintree Railroad Station on the left. In this street here is Pearl Street, and then the factories are beyond it. Shoe factories, which of course became famous in 1920. Let's move on to the landing. The landing train station was not right in the landing, it was on Allen Street, Bob. The photography here is in Weymouth looking back towards Braintree. This hill in the background is in Braintree, and between there and the photography is the Manatequit River. Here's another photo of the landing area. We're probably standing, if you're the photography, probably standing right on the town line. This is, this is Brookside Road coming in here, and the Bates Opera House, which I never made it to. Okay. The third station was the Braintree station. And again, this is a wonderful bird's eye view. This is 1880s or early 1890s. I'll orient you again. This is Washington Street going north to south. I'm sorry, north to south on Washington. And right here, it's kind of hard to see, but this is Elm Street going west to east. In the distance, West Street goes up over the top of the hill with the water tower. The railroad is here. And I think you can see a railroad train coming toward you from the south. So the station was right here on Elm. And I'll be showing you what this looks like in other photos, as well as this intersection. This is Middle, and this is Adams. And this is one of the busiest intersections in Braintree. This photograph is taken standing probably on Washington Street, looking up Elm Street East. The Elm Street Cemetery is between these two buildings. The First Congregational Church is out of sight to the left. This building was known as the Post Office Block, and it was right across the street from the railway station. So here's the Post Office Block. This picture is probably taken standing on the railroad track. This is Elm Street here. This is Railroad Street. And out of view to the left is the station. And this is what the station looks like. This is the north-south track and the branch that was built that goes through East Braintree, Weymouth, Hingham, Cohasset, Scituate. Now, this is a little superfluous. This is Braintree Square as well. I really didn't need this to make the point about where Braintree Square is, but this is such an intriguing photograph that I just included it because it's intriguing. So I don't know if you can tell, you have to have good eyesight, but there's a gentleman hanging off this car as it drives through South Braintree Square. So I want to know, is this the getaway car? But you'll notice also that many of these buildings are essentially what is there today. And this must, if you know, this is like 20s or 30s. Yeah, at least 20s or 30s. So Braintree's rail system was enhanced in the 1890s when the trolleys came in, because then you could live further away from the station, get on the trolley, and get to the station. And trolleys went everywhere in Braintree. You could get on a trolley, go to Nantasket Beach, go to Quincy, go to Brockton, and it allowed people to come to Braintree for employment as well, and it worked both ways. So what was happening in this period is the same thing that was happening elsewhere, the suburbanization of the United States. People were working in the city but living in the suburbs, just getting started in that period. So let me show you a couple of our maps to show how development got denser over time. This is an 1876 map. I'm showing you Elm Street, Adams Street, Middle Street, and River Street. And there's the amount of development. And now, 12 years later, you can see that there's subdivisions, houses being built, and then a little bit later, we've been looking at this area, pretty much all built in, Spruce Vine, Myrtle Street, and across north of Elm Street, this area as well. While we're here, I thought I would show you this area here, which has always been an industrial area. This was the site of the original ironworks. But there's two buildings here we have some really good photos of. The quality of the photos is not that great, but you'll get the point. This is the Morrison Woolen Mill, built in the 1830s, ran up until about 1900. Then there were subsequent mills after that. There was two buildings, three buildings really. They made men's underwear, and I've looked through all of our records at the Historical Society. I cannot find out whether they're boxers or briefs. The second building, and this is, you're standing on, I should have said this, you're standing on Elm Street, took in this photo looking southwest. Middle Street is over here on the right, and to the left here is Adams Street. And across the other side of Adams Street was this building. It used to be a barn. It was converted by Albion Drinkwater to a tannery. So we're standing now across the street from it. This is Adams Street. And today, if you go to that spot, you'll find a mobile gas station at the corner of Elm and Adams. I want to say about these photos, so they're probably from 1890s. For some of these people, this is probably the only time they got photographed in their entire life. And just continuing the theme of looking at development, this is 1888. We're now off of Washington Street. Here's the Braintree station up here at Elm, and you can see that the Hollis subdivision is platted out. There's over 100 home sites, and Monadequat and Hollis Street, new streets, Maple Street, Ash Street, and Walnut Street. So what was happening is that those railroad stations were attracting development, and that's how Braintree grew. Those three stations were the nucleus. This is an overview in 1909 of a larger part of Braintree. We've been focusing on this area here, but also you can see around Braintree, South Braintree Square's development, and you can also see the extensive railroad works. One of the other things the railroad did, it gave people a lot of jobs because of the railroad in Braintree. So they could have employment locally, but also get on a train and go to Boston and be there in 30 minutes. One other part of town that was overlooked for many years was the Mayflower Park part of Braintree. This is a map from the 1870s. After this was laid out, there wasn't very many homes that were built until about 25 years later. We have another map with the exact same layout, and the name has been changed from Mayflower Park to Braintree Highlands, and that's the name that stuck. And you'll see that in subsequent maps. So here's 1899. You can see Braintree Highlands is starting to be developed, but the other large areas of development are around the railroad stations, South Braintree, and the Landing. By the 1890s, Braintree was a sought-after suburb of Boston, relatively close, and lots of land available. Adam Warren Hobart, shown on the left, would sell you a lot, and he would build you a really fine house for about $5,000. Next person I'd like to introduce came here to Braintree as a young man. He had already made his fortune. He was 28, 29 years old. He married Elizabeth Kimball from Cohasset, and I've read his autobiography. His goal in life, he said his goal in life was always to be a farmer, which is so funny. He assisted Alexander Graham Bell in the invention of the telephone. He was the first person to hear the human voice over a telephone. He held half of the patents that Bell had. He was the chief engineer for the company. Tom Watson was a brilliant person. but yet he wanted to be a farmer. So he came to Braintree. He bought a farm on Quincy Avenue, about 70 acres, and he got into farming. He bought every latest gadget there was. He hired a few people to work for him. He farmed for 1 year and gave it up. And, you know, the soils in Braintree, if they're like my backyard, this was not a place to go. He said in his autobiography that he'd wish he had gone to UMass, University of Massachusetts Agricultural School for 2 years out in Amherst. He would have perhaps figured out what to do. But he had an interesting mind. He met his neighbor, Frank Wellington, who lived directly across the street on Quincy Avenue, and he started tinkering with him in a little shop and started making engines. And he sold engines for 10 years or so to anybody. He said in the mid-1890s that he thought about making engines for horseless carriages. You know, we could have been the Detroit of the USA. But he decided to make them for ships, because there were people in Braintree going back for centuries that had made ships. And so he got a workforce. His workforce was 2,000 people by 1900. He was very much of the mindset that he wanted to help people achieve. He had lots of money. And what he did to keep things going in the 90s when there was a recession is he bid on government contracts. And they gave them to him. So in 1901, he launched, or 1900, he launched 2 U.S. destroyers. And the other night I went down to the Manatequit River. I was at Watson Park between innings of my grandson's baseball game. I took a look at the river. It's not a very wide river. He was launching a 245-foot long destroyer. So he figured out that that's really not a good place for a shipyard. And in 1901, which is my second date, he moved the shipyard about a mile north to a parcel of land that straddled Quincy and Braintree. The newspapers were all aghast in Braintree. We're losing Tom Watson. They didn't understand the silver lining, namely he can build a shipyard 100 times bigger, and he did. So Tom Watson gets a lot of credit for building that shipyard, and because of that shipyard and the jobs that it brought and the need for housing and the need for all the other services associated with new residents, there was a big jump in the number of roads in Braintree. In 1880, we only had 51 roads in Braintree. It went to 200 by the First World War. This is a photograph, amazing photograph taken from the landing looking up Quincy Avenue toward the east, toward the west, toward the north, toward the south, not sure, but we're in the landing looking that way. Here's Tom Watson's house. Across the street was Wellington's house, and here, this is taken about 1900, here is his shipyard. When he moved his shipyard, he took all his equipment, all the houses, put it on barges, and rowed it down the river and re-erected it in Quincy and Braintree. He built submarines for the Japanese Navy. He built U.S. submarines. He built these 2 battleships which went around the world in the Great White Fleet that President Teddy Roosevelt sent out in 1909. This is a World War I vessel. By World War I, there were 15,000 people working at the shipyard. And Braintree was impacted, Quincy was impacted, Weymouth was impacted. Really, the whole South Shore, because of the major source of employment, there were very much additional roads built. This is the last ship photo I have for you. This is the USS Massachusetts. You can go down to Fall River and get on this ship. This ship had extensive combat experience in the Pacific during World War II. So that completes 1901. We've covered 1845. The next date that I've selected is 1960. This is a map of Braintree from the mid-50s. The old colony, the railroad is still there. It's New York, New Haven, and Hartford, or some other railroad. There's the spur going over to to East Braintree. At that time, if those of you who lived here, the development was here, north, central, and the Highlands has started to get built up. So the next date was 1960, and that was the date that the State Highway Department finished 3 major roadways. Took them 15 years to get 128 done, which comes into Braintree oddly from the southwest. It took them 10 years to get the Southeast Expressway built from Boston south to this point. And then I don't know how long it took them to do Route 3, but Route 3, of course, goes all the way to the Cape. The junction is the famous Braintree split. And I happened to be on the expressway today coming home from Boston in lots of traffic between the gas tank and the Braintree split. And what bothers me a little bit is the traffic people are starting to call it the split. Well, it's the Braintree split. So this network of roadways made it easier for people to get to Braintree, and it made it easier for people to live in Braintree and to go elsewhere. To me, this really cemented in Braintree's growth, and it kept you'll see in a minute, the trajectory of Braintree's growth over the years. This kept the momentum. This is a couple of newspaper article photographs of the Braintree split being built. So it's really hard to see, but this is a fill area. The split is here. This street here is Common Street. And this aerial photograph shows Route 3 slashing through the middle of Braintree. This is the Washington Street overpass. This is the Elm Street overpass, and obviously this is a work in progress. So some of you saw this earlier, the famous 5 corners. 5 corners was invented in the 1930s. I'm sorry, the 1830s, when Franklin Street was constructed from West Street and Granite Street intersection down to Washington Street. And starting in the 1920s, the old 128 came into 5 corners, turned right, went down Franklin Street, down Washington Street, over Grove Street, and into Weymouth. So when the new 128 came in 1960, of course, all of this traffic went away. Now, I had to investigate that, so I did go out 3 weeks ago, and it didn't really happen. This is roughly the same view. You're looking. This is Franklin. This is where people like those umbrella drinks, mobile gas stations. Some of you actually remember this. I did not grow up in Braintree, so this is all news to me. Oh, yeah? Okay. Oh, yeah, says Mary. And then today, a little bit different scene. I don't think TD Bank would give you an umbrella drink, but I'm sure you can find one in Braintree. I haven't talked a lot about population, but Braintree was a small town for a very long time. A couple of hundred families moved in the 1640s and 50s. By the time of the Revolution, there was only 1,500 people in Braintree. And throughout the 19th century, even though the railroad came, by 1900, there's still only 6,000 people in Braintree. But thanks to Tom Watson, and thanks to the highway system, and 1,000 other reasons, of course, but those 2 reasons, that we have the post-World War II baby boom. I'm a boomer myself. It really shot up. And then it's kind of leveled off, but we're on our way to 40,000 people. So let me just summarize. Thanks to the people who originally lived in Braintree, who made paths over thousands of years, when the English came in the 1620s and 30s and 40s, there were already paths there. Sure, they had to widen them because the Native Americans didn't have horses or carts or anything, but they were there and they were on the right routes. They were on places where you could ford the stream. They weren't on steep hills. They didn't go through the middle of the swamp. And that's really dictated our major roads in Braintree. So maybe next time you're driving down Washington or Elm or Liberty or whatever, you might think about those people who trod there earlier. Braintree now has about 600 roads. Many people, myself included, think that's enough, but we're probably going to have more. Old Colony Railroad, in my opinion, had a lot to do with that because that established the 3 stations, and it was the stations which brought the growth to those areas, and things like Tremont Street and other streets were built really to accommodate people who wanted to get to Boston or elsewhere, wanted to go to New York, and people who worked in the railroad. I can't say enough about Tom Watson. You know, in Braintree, he's probably principally known as the person who talked the Massachusetts legislature to allow municipal ownership of light companies, who talked the town meeting into appropriating money for lights, and who served as a, with no salary, as the superintendent of the Braintree Electric Light Department. He also, along with his wife Elizabeth, started a kindergarten in his property, and eventually the town of Braintree made kindergarten available for all Braintree students. They named a school after Tom Watson. It's closed since, but who knows? Maybe they'll name another one after him. So that's Four River Move in 1901 that proved the silver lining. And then finally, completion of the regional highway network. A friend of mine told me that in 1960, the word going around Braintree was that the Southeast Expressway was already obsolete, overcrowded. I moved to Braintree with my family in 1976. I didn't come for the highways. I didn't come for the schools. I really didn't know much about Braintree at all, but I knew the Red Line would get here in 1980, and that's what brought me here. So transportation is important. It was important back in the Old Colony days as well. That's all I have. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Stephen, I'm on the clock, so is there time for questions? Because I know at least one gentleman has a question.
And
Did I answer? I answered it?
When the old streets, when you're talking the old streets, the only one you didn't mention was Elm Street, and I just wanted to confirm it was.
Yeah.
Just looking on the map.
Yeah. Lots of traffic on Elm Street because I go a lot to Watson Park from where I live, and but Elm Street, boy, the Richard Thayer lived there. A lot of the early well-known families in Braintree started their life on Elm Street. Yes.
So is this history on when they discontinued the Old Colony Ring Road, original road? Like I saw some of, on Adams Street, I saw some old tracks that not being used.
Yeah, if you've seen old tracks on streets,
Dad.
it's the so-called street railway, and that was lasted until the 80s, until the 1930s rather.
Is that your son?
Yes, Timothy.
Oh, okay.
Timothy.
Dad, you need to repeat the questions, please.
Oh, sorry.
If I don't make it to the person with this
Yeah,
microphone.
old railroad tracks in Braintree. Thank you. Yes.
So, was Granite Street, was that like a swamp? Because it looked like it was on the part of the map that was a swamp.
Granite Street.
Granite Street, yeah.
If you drive down Granite Street between Five Corners going south, all the land to your right, to the west, is very, very flat. Much of that was wet. Excuse me?
Was farmland back in the day.
Yeah.
Like, do you mean between Granite and, like between Five Corners and Pond Street?
Yes, to the west. I mean, there's a shopping center there now, but the land was very flat, and once.
The land Braintree High School was built on was pretty much swampland for much of it.
Yeah, there was a lot of swamps in Braintree. Braintree was one of only 2 towns selected by the Commonwealth to build ironworks, and they did it purposely because they had bog iron, which can be harvested from the bogs.
John, just on that issue with that wetland area you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Chris, you know this better than I do, but talking about the current Braintree High School was built basically on wetland, and right now they've been trying to build a ice hockey rink in the parking behind the parking lot of Braintree High School for a few years now. And apparently, one of the reasons why they having difficulty doing that is because the land is still wet there. They can't go down. They can't sink foundation. So it's still kind of wetland in that area.
Yes.
So I live around the South Shore Mall area. I was overheard that was a wetland or ocean or wherever that the backfill. You have any history on that side?
South Shore Plaza area was farmland back in the 30s and 40s. There were actually trout ponds shown on maps we have going back to 1700s. That area was extensively mined for gravel. There was a railroad spur coming in from the old colony, and for years, Quincy Sand and Gravel was pulling sand and gravel out of that area. Parkside Avenue and the end of Walnut Street, where it intersects Common Street, very, very interesting. And of course, the highways made the malls possible. Thank you all very much.